Okay, good morning. This is our next set of notes, which is going to be a brand new unit. And this next unit is going to be the respiratory system. So let's go through at least today some of these notes, maybe just a couple of slides, and we'll do a brief introduction to the respiratory system. Okay, so the functions of the respiratory system include exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now, these are gases. Oxygen is a gas that comes from the atmosphere that's needed by the body. Carbon dioxide is a gas that's produced by the body that then has to be expelled out of the body. In addition to that, another function of the respiratory system is to produce sound. We have a larynx that sits on top of our trachea, and when we pass air through the larynx, the vocal cords within it vibrate, producing sounds. We could break things down into a couple different levels. When it comes to respiration happens externally, and that's the exchange of gases between the air outside and your lungs. All right, so oxygen coming from the air going into your lungs and then into your blood, and then the blood bringing carbon dioxide to your lungs, and the carbon dioxide leaving the blood going into your lungs, and you're breathing it out. This is all external respiration, or otherwise known as breathing, or otherwise known as gas exchange, right? But it's not the only place that gases are exchanged, because internal respiration involves the gases being exchanged between the blood and the tissues of the body, so at the cells. And then if we go deeper inside the cells, we see cell respiration as the oxygen actually enters into the individual cells, hooks up with the mitochondria. The mitochondria use the oxygen along with food nutrients to make energy, and then the cells, as a result, produce carbon dioxide. So 3 different levels of respiration: internal cellular respiration inside the cells, making energy; the blood picking up carbon dioxide as a result of cell respiration; and then the blood bringing oxygen down to the individual cells. That's internal respiration. And then external respiration is what's happening between the atmosphere and the body. So the major organs of the respiratory system are the lungs, right? We could see we have 2 lungs here. And this diagram is just showing the flow of air as air is blown in. It enters down the trachea and then splits into these 2 tubes. This is called the pulmonary trunk, and this includes the right bronchus and the left bronchus. And then inside the lungs, you can see the bronchi divide many, many times into these smaller tubules called the bronchioles. We go from a right bronchus and left bronchus into a primary bronchiole, secondary bronchiole, tertiary bronchioles, but then eventually we hit terminal bronchioles, and we're going to hit a dead end. At the dead end, we find these grape-like structures called the alveoli, and this is the site of gas exchange. So these are the units of structure and function for the respiratory system, these little air sacs. And there's a lot of blood surrounding these air sacs, because remember, we send the blood to the lungs to pick up oxygen. So it's in the alveoli that we see gases being exchanged between the blood and the lungs. This diagram is just showing you that once blood goes to the lungs and drops off carbon dioxide, picks up oxygen, that blood will flow first back to the heart, and then from the heart, it will go to all your body's systems, all your body's cells, where the oxygen is fed to the cells. So now we're seeing internal respiration here. And then carbon dioxide will get picked up by the blood also. And then the whole thing starts all over again. Now that blood goes back to the right side of the heart, and then the right side of the heart sends it back to the lungs. All right, so this is external respiration happening here between the blood and the lungs. Internal respiration happening between the blood and the cells. We could break down the respiratory organs into upper and lower parts. The upper respiratory tract involves your nasal cavity, which is right behind your nose, and your pharynx, which is another word for your throat. Um, and then also the larynx. The larynx would be the lowest portion, the lowest structure of the upper respiratory tracts. The larynx is your voice box. From there, we enter the lower respiratory tract, beginning with the trachea, the bronchi, and then the bronchioles that extend deep into the lungs. The bronchioles, of course, divide over and over again into smaller and smaller bronchioles, and then they all usually end with these grape-like sac-looking structures, which are the alveoli. All right. There are linings or membranes that surround the lung, and these are called pleural membranes. But there's also membranes that line the cavity, right? Which are also a type of visceral membrane or serous membrane. Both of these membranes produce fluids. And then, of course, there's a space between the lung and the tissue that's filled with fluids. All right. Just another look at the nasal cavity. We could kind of divide the pharynx or the throat into three parts. Remember, the throat or the pharynx is a common passageway for not only air, but also for food. Which is why this epiglottis is important, because the epiglottis, when we swallow food, prevents the food from going down the trachea and diverts it towards the esophagus. The esophagus would be just posterior to this trachea. The trachea is more anterior, which means it's out in front. If you touch your neck, you could feel the trachea here. So food would be going down the tube directly behind it. The pharynx is divided into three sections. Right behind the nose is the nasopharynx. Behind the mouth or the tongue is the oropharynx. And then just superior to the larynx would be the laryngopharynx. But it's all just considered the pharynx. The nasal cavity is pretty important because as we bring in the air, most of the time it comes through the nostrils. There are a lot of capillaries in here. And what that does is it creates a warm environment. There's also mucus in here. The mucus does a couple things. First thing it does is it helps to moisten the air. If cold, dry air is coming in, we want to kind of convert that cold, dry air into warm, moist air. The capillaries help to warm the air. The mucus helps to moisten the air, but it also helps to trap any particles that might be in the air. Olfactory nerves are going to be in here also. Olfactory nerves provide us with a sense of smell, and they extend down from the brain through this ethmoid bone, and the little olfactory bulb hairs extend out in the mucus. Not really a function of the respiratory system, however. All right. So the pharynx, again, we got nasopharynx back here, oropharynx in yellow, and then the laryngopharynx is really what we call this in blue. All right. The epiglottis is a very important structure. Keeps food from going down your trachea. And then, of course, the voice box is called the larynx, right? It contains 9 fibrocartilaginous plates. There's a mucous membrane. The opening to the trachea, at the very, very top, there's an opening. That's where the air goes through. That's called the glottis, which explains why this flap is called the epiglottis. That means above the glottis. So that keeps food from going down there. So this big structure here, this is a big flap of tissue. This is the actual epiglottis. these are the vocal cords within the larynx, and you can see as she's speaking or singing, you can see how these vibrate. Now, if we pause the video here, this is the trachea. So this is the glottis of the trachea. You can see in the trachea how there's these cartilage rings. This is called cricoid cartilage. And this cartilage is very important because when you're laying down on your back, this ensures that that tube never closes. It keeps it open all the time. So even when you're sleeping, you constantly need to be breathing, right? And these cartilage rings prevent this tube from closing in on itself. All right, enough of that. You could watch this on your own because this link is in the notes. All right, let's stop here for today. I think this is enough. So I'm going to put a couple of summary questions up. And if you have any questions, just reach out to me through the email. All right. Good luck on your first day of new instruction.